Under the vast dome of a deep space research station that drifted quietly near the edge of a red dwarf system, Syria, a young alien scholar, moved carefully among rows of glowing instruments and humming machines. Her species, the Lurathi, had long prided themselves on intellect and precision, but Syria carried more curiosity than most of her people. When she was selected to join an interspecies program with humans, she thought she understood what to expect: another species with strengths and flaws, much like any other civilization she had studied in books. But as soon as she began working alongside them, she sensed something was different. The humans were not remarkable in size or appearance compared to many other species that passed through the station's busy halls, yet there was something about the way they moved and adapted that unsettled her in ways she could not name. She had watched one group repair an overheating reactor core with little more than makeshift tools, sweat dripping down their faces as they laughed with each other despite the danger. Where her people would have faltered under stress, retreating to calculate safer solutions, the humans pressed forward, bodies strained and trembling, but somehow refusing to give up until the task was done. That night, Syria recorded her observations in her digital log, writing that their resilience was not logical, yet it yielded results that even advanced planning sometimes could not achieve. Days turned into weeks, and Syria's fascination grew. She noticed the subtle ways humans seemed to adapt to shifts in gravity, air composition, and even food shortages. A minor system failure once cut off the nutrient processors in the mess hall for 3 days. Many alien workers grew weak, some even collapsing from the lack of their carefully balanced diets. But the humans scavenged whatever supplies were left, cooked simple meals over heat coils, and shared with one another without hesitation. They endured hunger with jokes, keeping morale higher than Syria thought possible. She had seen their muscles tremble with fatigue and their skin blister from chemical burns, yet they stood back up, moving forward as though they carried an unseen energy source. To Syria, it was both inspiring and confusing. Her own kind valued efficiency and balance, but these humans seemed to thrive in imbalance, as though chaos itself gave them strength. The more she observed, the more she felt an unfamiliar tension within herself. During one experiment in the gravity labs, Syria watched a human named Carter strap himself into a training rig designed to simulate sudden shifts in pressure and pull. Where most alien volunteers could withstand only a few minutes before retreating in exhaustion, Carter pushed himself until he collapsed. Yet even as medical drones lifted him to safety, he smiled faintly, saying he would last longer next time. Syria could not understand it: why risk one's body so recklessly, and why treat pain as though it were nothing more than a challenge to be beaten. That evening, she stayed longer than usual in the observation chamber, reviewing the footage again and again. Each time, she searched for weakness, for some sign that would reveal the limits of human endurance. Yet instead of finding a breaking point, she found herself unsettled by the realization that humans seemed built not just to endure hardship, but to embrace it. Her confusion deepened when she began to interact with them more personally. At first, Syria maintained the professional distance expected of her role, answering questions about Lurathi physiology or data analysis when asked. But humans were not content with distance. They invited her into their gatherings, offered her unfamiliar food, and asked about her home world with disarming warmth. One evening, after hours of work in the environmental control bay, Carter handed her a container of steaming broth and insisted she try it. The flavor was too strong, far sharper than what her kind normally consumed, but she forced herself to drink. To her surprise, it filled her with a strange energy, a heat that spread through her veins. She noted in her private journal that night that even something as simple as human food seemed designed to push boundaries, to ignite something within. Still, the strongest impression came not from what she ate or heard, but from what she felt one day in the engine maintenance chamber. She had gone to observe a repair operation after a coolant leak damaged several critical systems. The humans worked quickly, sweat pouring from their skin as they struggled with heavy components in the suffocating heat. The scent that rose from their effort was sharp and strange, unlike anything her kind produced. At first, she tried to ignore it, but soon her pulse quickened, her breathing grew shallow, and her limbs felt light, almost trembling. She backed away, unsettled, and told herself it was the heat of the chamber affecting her body. Yet even when she stepped into the cooler air outside, the memory of that moment lingered in her chest. Something inside her had shifted, though she could not yet name what it was. From that day forward, Syria grew more watchful, no longer observing only with the eyes of a researcher, but with the unease of someone who had glimpsed a truth she could not yet understand. Were humans simply another species with unusual resilience, or was there something deeper hidden in them, something that reached beyond logic and science? She tried to bury her thoughts beneath her duties, yet every time she saw a human laugh through exhaustion or stand tall after injury, the questions returned stronger than before. Her people had long believed themselves beyond such mysteries, their knowledge deep and precise. But here, on this distant station, Syria began to realize that there were still secrets in the universe that no textbook could explain, and humanity might be one of them. Syria had never thought much about humans before she was assigned to the Deep Space Station. To her people, humans were simply newcomers to the wider galaxy, inexperienced but strangely persistent. Yet, the more time she spent in the laboratory with them, the more she noticed details that troubled her curiosity. They laughed easily, recovered quickly from accidents, and pushed themselves in ways her own kind would never dare. At first, she believed this was simply bravado, a need to show strength in front of allies. But as days turned into weeks, she began to realize there was something more beneath their behavior, something that no record in her species' archives had explained. It began one ordinary cycle when Syria was cataloging samples in the biolab. The station lights hummed softly overhead, and the air recyclers whispered in the background. She was focused on her work until she heard a sharp sound, metal scraping against metal. Turning, she saw one of the human engineers, a young man named Carter, accidentally slice his hand open on a broken panel. Syria gasped. The wound looked deep, bright red fluid spilling from it. Her instincts told her this was dangerous. In her culture, such injuries meant long recovery and often weakness for life. She rushed forward, ready to call medical staff, but to her shock Carter simply pressed a cloth against the wound, muttered something under his breath, and continued his work as if nothing had happened. Syria stared in disbelief. "You are hurt," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice calm. Carter glanced at her and shrugged. "Yeah. Just a scratch. I'll be fine." He wrapped the cloth tighter, blood still seeping through, but his face carried no sign of pain. If anything, he seemed annoyed more at the delay than the injury itself. Within moments, he was already tightening bolts again, as if the cut didn't exist. Syria could not stop watching. In her mind, such damage would have taken weeks to heal, yet this human behaved as though his body barely registered the harm. Later, when she was alone, she replayed the event again and again in her thoughts. Her people, the Illyri, prized fragility as a reminder of balance. They lived carefully, avoiding risk, for even small wounds left scars that could weaken them forever. But the humans, they seemed almost careless with their bodies, trusting them to recover. It was reckless, yet strangely powerful. Syria could not deny the pull of curiosity rising inside her. What allowed them this strength? And why did no one speak of it in the grand records? Her chance to investigate deeper came soon after. During a joint exploration mission, she was assigned to a surface team alongside Carter and two other humans. The planet below was harsh, its ground unstable, its air thick with minerals that made breathing difficult for most species. Syria wore her protective suit, every movement cautious, every step measured. But the humans moved with surprising ease, even joking as they carried heavy equipment across rocky terrain. Hours into the mission, a small quake shook the ground, and part of the ridge collapsed beneath them. Syria lost her footing, tumbling down before catching herself on jagged stone. Pain shot through her arm as the rock tore her suit and skin. Her vision blurred, fear rushing in. A wound in such an environment meant disaster. Infection, weakness, possibly even death if she could not reach medical care quickly. But before panic consumed her, Carter slid down beside her, his own arm scraped raw from the fall. He didn't even glance at his injury. Instead, he reached for her, helping her back up with steady hands. "You all right?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. Syria blinked at him, confused. "Your arm, it is damaged too." He looked down, as if only noticing then, and laughed. "It'll heal. Yours looks worse. Let's patch you up." Without hesitation, he tore part of his undersuit and pressed it against her bleeding arm, sealing her suit's breach. He ignored his own wound, focusing entirely on hers. Within minutes, they were moving again, Carter carrying much of her gear to ease her strain. His resilience left her stunned. By the time they returned to the station, his arm was already clotting, his movements unhindered. Her own body, however, ached deeply, reminding her of its frailty. That night, as Syria lay in her quarters, she turned the events over in her mind. The humans carried an aura of durability, but it was not only physical. It was mental, too, the way they endured pain, fear, and setbacks with a strange sort of stubborn hope. She recalled how Carter had smiled through his own suffering, choosing to help her instead of focusing on himself. It unsettled her, and yet she felt something else building in her chest, fascination. Determined to understand, she began quiet research. She accessed station medical logs, studying human biology. What she found shocked her. Their bodies were built for recovery in ways her people could hardly imagine. Muscle fibers regrew stronger after being torn. Bones knit themselves back together faster than most known species. Their immune systems attacked infections with relentless efficiency. Even their minds were wired for resilience, adapting to trauma by finding ways to push forward. To Syria, it seemed almost unnatural, as if humanity had been shaped by endless trials to become creatures of survival. Still, there were gaps in the record's details classified beyond her clearance. It was as if humanity wanted to keep the full extent of their endurance hidden. Why? Were they afraid others might see them as dangerous? Or was the truth something far greater than she could guess? Each question pulled her deeper, until she found herself watching the humans more closely during every shift, noting each gesture, each laugh, each shrug in the face of hardship. The more she observed, the more a strange unease grew within her. If humans could endure so much, what limits did they truly have? Her thoughts would not let her rest. In quiet moments, she caught herself staring at her own arm where Carter had bandaged her, remembering the steadiness in his hands and the lightness in his voice. She had expected pity or judgment, but he had treated her as if her weakness was temporary, as if strength could be borrowed until it returned. It was not just biology. It was something else, something deeper that her people had never valued. Willpower. Unity. A refusal to surrender even when broken. These qualities frightened her, yet they also drew her in, as though she were glimpsing a truth too large to ignore. By the end of that cycle, Syria made a decision. She would uncover the full secret of human resilience, no matter what rules she had to bend. Something told her that what she had seen so far was only the surface of a mystery that could reshape how her people viewed humanity and perhaps, how the galaxy itself understood survival. Syria had always trusted the station's quiet routine, the way cycles blended together with predictable rhythm. But ever since her injury on the mission and her close observation of Carter's strange resilience, her world had shifted. She could not stop thinking about what she had learned from the medical logs, about the hidden durability of humans, and about the way they seemed to accept pain as though it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Yet as she began to dig deeper, she discovered that whispers followed the humans wherever they went. At first, she caught them only in fragments, soft voices in the halls when people thought no one was listening, or quick exchanges between alien officers who ended their conversations abruptly when she drew near. The tone was always the same, caution mixed with fear. Some spoke of human soldiers who had marched for days without food, others of workers who survived radiation exposure that should have killed any other species. The stories carried the edge of myth, but the unease in the voices made them feel real. Syria's curiosity burned stronger than ever, and she began to wonder why so many details about humanity seemed to live in shadow, unrecorded and unspoken in the official archives. One evening, she entered the station library, a vast chamber filled with glowing data crystals and ancient recordings. The Illyri rarely visited it, preferring curated summaries to raw accounts, but Syria wanted the truth hidden beneath layers of formality. She requested records of first contact with humans, searching for evidence beyond what her academy had taught. Most files were restricted, locked behind diplomatic seals. Still, she found fragments, testimonies from alien envoys who had encountered human crews. One account described a damaged freighter drifting in deep space, its systems failing, oxygen dwindling. By all calculations, the crew should have perished within hours. Yet when rescuers finally reached them days later, every human was alive, bruised and weakened but still standing, having shared their air, rationed scraps, and pushed themselves beyond limits. The witness had ended the record with a simple sentence, "They endure what others cannot." Syria sat in silence after reading it, the words echoing in her mind. It was not exaggeration. It was observation, written in awe. The next day, as she walked through the main hub, she overheard two alien traders whispering near the docking bay. Their tones were hushed but urgent, and curiosity tugged her closer until she could make out their words. "Do not underestimate them," one said. "The humans smile, yes, but when cornered, they become something else. I saw one on Tvel Prime, crushed under wreckage. Bones shattered. We thought he was gone, but when rescue came hours later, he had dragged himself free with one arm and carried another crewmate across half a canyon. No other species would even attempt such madness." The other trader muttered, "They are dangerous in ways no council wants to admit. That is why so much about them is hidden. It is safer that way." The two moved on quickly, leaving Syria frozen where she stood, her heart pounding. Dangerous. The word unsettled her, but she could not deny the thread of truth in their fear. Was human resilience not only strength, but also something the galaxy feared? Her curiosity was no longer simple interest, it was a hunger for answers. She returned to her quarters, dimmed the lights, and sat staring at the glow of her terminal. The faces of the humans she worked beside filled her thoughts. Carter's easy smile, his casual dismissal of pain, his unshakable determination. Was that only kindness, or was it something deeper, something that could become terrifying if turned in another direction? She wondered why her people never spoke openly of these stories. Perhaps it was shame, the Illyri seeing in humans a reflection of what they lacked. Or perhaps it was fear that admitting the truth would shift balances of power that had been steady for centuries. Either way, she sensed a secret hidden in plain sight, guarded by silence more powerful than words. Her next chance to glimpse that truth came during a routine engineering inspection. She accompanied Carter and another human, Alvarez, through the lower decks, where machinery thrummed and heat shimmered in the air. They discovered a coolant leak, its fumes toxic even in small amounts. Protocol demanded evacuation, but Alvarez volunteered to stay behind to seal the breach. Syria protested exposure to such gases could cause organ failure in her people, but Alvarez only grinned and said, "We'll be fine. Just hold the line a few minutes." He and Carter worked with quick precision, their faces sweating, their breathing heavy, but they never faltered. Syria felt dizziness rising in her chest even through her protective filter, yet the humans pressed forward until the system stabilized. When it was done, Alvarez coughed and wiped his brow as though he had finished nothing more dangerous than a sprint. His lungs should have been burned, yet within hours he was walking through the station as though nothing had happened. The quiet rumors suddenly felt much louder, no longer whispers but undeniable truth. Humans not only endured harm, they thrived in spite of it, bending survival itself in their favor. That night, Syria dreamed uneasily. She saw humans walking through fire, bleeding yet unbroken, rising again when all others would have fallen. She woke with her heart racing, her skin clammy with fear and wonder. What were they, truly? Beings shaped by hardship into unyielding survivors, or something even stranger, a species that refused every law of weakness the galaxy had come to accept? She could no longer dismiss the possibility that humans carried within them a force more powerful than strength of body, the refusal to surrender. And if that was true, then the whispered rumors were not warnings to be ignored, they were clues to a truth that might one day change everything. By the next cycle, Syria's resolve had hardened. She would not be content with fragments of gossip or glimpses of resilience. She would uncover the full story, no matter how deeply it was buried. If the galaxy feared humans, she wanted to know why. If her people chose silence, she wanted to hear the words they dared not speak. And if Carter, with his easy courage and quiet strength, was a living example of that secret, then perhaps staying close to him would be the key. She felt a flicker of unease, realizing that the more she sought answers, the more she tied herself to the very species that unsettled her. But beneath that unease was something stronger, an undeniable pull of curiosity, sharpened now into determination. The whispers would no longer be enough. Syria needed the truth. And deep down, she suspected that truth would not be gentle. Syria had always thought that knowledge was built on trust, yet the deeper she looked into the strange nature of humans, the more she realized that many truths were not handed freely but carefully hidden away, as if the galaxy feared what might happen should they be openly revealed. After the coolant leak incident, her mind was restless, and she began to notice signs she had overlooked before. There were small things at first: the way Carter could lift heavy cargo without assistance, the way Alvarez kept working long past the point other species would collapse, and the way every human seemed to recover from exhaustion as if their bodies carried an invisible reserve of strength. The more she watched, the more she wondered whether these were accidents of biology or part of a design no one else dared admit. She suspected that the station officials knew far more than they showed. It was then she heard of something called evaluation drills, unofficial exercises that tested crew under hidden conditions. Few spoke of them, and fewer still invited outsiders to observe. But Syria's curiosity was no longer something she could restrain. She had to see for herself what truths were being kept out of sight. Her chance came when Carter approached her one evening, his tone casual but his eyes carrying something deeper. "We're running checks on the lower sector tomorrow," he said, as if it were routine maintenance. But the way he hesitated suggested otherwise. Syria agreed without pressing questions, though her heart quickened with anticipation. The next day, she followed him through dim passageways rarely used, until they reached a sealed training hall. Inside, a group of humans had gathered, their faces serious, their movements sharp with readiness. There were no official insignias, no recording devices, nothing that would mark this as sanctioned by the station. It was secret, and it was intentional. Carter explained softly, "Sometimes command runs tests without announcing them. They want to see who reacts under pressure." The words sounded simple, but Syria quickly realized there was nothing ordinary about what she was about to witness. The test began without warning. Alarms blared, lights dimmed, and the room shifted into simulated chaos. Explosions echoed through hidden speakers, smoke filled the air, and heavy panels dropped from the ceiling to block exits. The humans reacted instantly. They did not panic, they did not wait for orders. Each one moved with an instinct that seemed almost rehearsed yet not mechanical. Some began clearing debris, others secured supplies, while Carter pulled Syria behind a shield wall, his voice calm but firm. "Stay low. Watch." She watched in awe as Alvarez crawled under fallen metal to drag a mock casualty free, ignoring the weight pressing against him. Another human pried open a sealed hatch with nothing but a crowbar, his muscles straining until the lock gave way. These were not drills meant for efficiency. They were trials of endurance, testing limits in a way that would break most beings. Yet the humans embraced it, sweat on their brows, determination in their eyes, as if they had been born for moments like this. Syria found her hands trembling. To her people, such conditions would have been unbearable: too much noise, too much heat, too much chaos. The Illyri thrived in order and calm, and even trained soldiers relied on structure and command. Yet here were humans, thriving in the opposite, their strength emerging not despite disorder but because of it. When the smoke grew thicker and the simulated oxygen levels began to fall, Syria nearly fainted, her body screaming for relief. Carter noticed and steadied her, slipping his own respirator over her face without hesitation. He did not falter even as his own breaths grew ragged. "You see now," he whispered through the mask, his voice steady. "This is why people fear us." When the simulation finally ended, alarms silenced, and smoke cleared, the humans were exhausted but upright. They exchanged small smiles, not of pride, but of quiet understanding. Syria sat weak against the wall, her chest still heaving, her mind spinning with what she had witnessed. It had not been courage alone, nor strength alone, it was something else, something more unsettling. Humans seemed to draw power from the very edge of collapse, as though the closer they came to breaking, the stronger they became. That was why no record truly captured their essence. Numbers and reports could not measure this refusal to yield. Afterward, Carter walked her back through the corridors. He did not speak much, but she could sense that he had allowed her into a circle not meant for outsiders. Finally, he said, "Most species don't understand. They see resilience as luck or stubbornness. But for us, it's survival. Back on Earth, we didn't always have safety. We had storms, famine, wars, predators. If we gave up easily, we wouldn't be here now." Syria listened carefully, every word settling in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she had been struggling to form. It wasn't that humans enjoyed hardship. It was that hardship had shaped them so completely that overcoming it had become part of their nature. She began to realize why the galaxy whispered about them. Strength that thrived in chaos was not only inspiring, it was unpredictable. And the unpredictable was always feared. That night, Syria struggled to sleep. She kept recalling the way Alvarez's arms shook as he forced the hatch open, the way Carter's eyes stayed calm while alarms blared, the way every human treated exhaustion as a temporary obstacle instead of a final limit. She realized that her earlier studies had only scratched the surface. What she had witnessed today was a truth no archive could explain: humans were creatures forged in the furnace of trial, and even when brought to the brink, they refused to collapse. That refusal was more powerful than weapons or technology. It was the kind of power that could alter the balance of entire civilizations. By dawn, Syria made her decision. She would not simply collect fragments or watch from a distance anymore. She would stay close, learn directly from them, and uncover the full extent of this hidden strength. She felt a quiet unease, wondering what it would mean for her people if she brought such knowledge back. But she also felt a spark of something else: admiration, perhaps even hope. If humans could endure the unendurable, then perhaps the galaxy had much to learn from them. The tests had ended, but for Syria, the true journey had only begun. Days passed after Syria's first glimpse into the hidden drills, yet her mind would not let go of what she had seen. The humans carried on as though nothing unusual had happened, laughing in the cafeteria, exchanging casual jokes in corridors, running their shifts like any ordinary workers, but Syria knew there was something deeper beneath the surface. She had seen the quiet strength that emerged only under pressure, and now she wondered what would happen if that pressure did not come in the form of a controlled test but in a real moment of danger. Her questions were answered sooner than she expected. One night, alarms tore through the station, not simulated this time but painfully real. A sudden impact rattled the metal walls, throwing Syria from her cot. Red warning lights flared in every corridor, accompanied by the cold voice of the station's AI announcing structural breaches on the outer hull. Syria scrambled to her feet, rushing into the hall where panicked crew members darted back and forth. Amid the chaos, she saw Carter and Alvarez, already moving with sharp focus. There was no hesitation, no fear clouding their expressions. "Follow me," Carter barked, and though his words were short, the weight of command in his voice steadied her racing thoughts. The source of the damage was not immediately clear. Some whispered of a stray meteor, others of sabotage, but the truth mattered little in the moment. A breach in the outer rings had trapped a group of workers in a failing sector where oxygen was quickly dropping. Emergency drones were too slow to respond, and the nearest rescue units were far out of range. Syria hesitated at the entrance to the damaged wing, the heat of escaping plasma already warping the air, but Carter and Alvarez pressed forward without pause. The station groaned under stress, sparks raining from severed wires, yet the humans seemed to move faster the worse the situation became. Syria followed, her lungs burning, her limbs heavy, but she could not ignore the determination in their stride. They forced open jammed doors with bare strength, ignored cuts and bruises from falling debris, and called out instructions with clarity even as smoke clouded the halls. It struck Syria that these men were not just strong in body but in spirit, carrying a calm certainty that seemed to infect everyone around them. Workers who moments ago were paralyzed with fear suddenly moved with renewed purpose, copying the humans' steady urgency. They reached the sealed chamber where the trapped crew were running out of air. The emergency systems had locked down, and the only way in was through a narrow crawl space partially blocked by twisted metal. Alvarez went first, squeezing into the opening with nothing but a small torch, while Carter secured cables to pull victims out. Syria's hands shook as she held a light to guide them, watching Alvarez drag out one worker after another, each one coughing and pale but alive. The heat inside was unbearable, the pressure alarms blaring louder with every second, but Alvarez refused to stop. When his arms trembled and his breath came ragged, Syria thought he would collapse, but instead he gritted his teeth and pushed harder, hauling the last two survivors into Carter's waiting arms. Carter himself looked ready to collapse, sweat streaming down his face, veins standing out on his arms as he carried a half-conscious technician over his shoulder. Yet his eyes remained steady, sharp, unyielding. Syria's own body screamed for relief, her lungs aching, her vision blurring from the smoke. Every instinct in her told her to retreat, to save herself before the failing sector collapsed entirely. But when she saw Carter and Alvarez still working, refusing to abandon even one person, something shifted inside her. It was not logic that kept them going, nor duty alone, it was a refusal to accept defeat, a stubborn spark that burned brighter the closer they came to breaking. And then it happened. A loud crack thundered through the corridor as the wall behind them split, flames erupting from the rupture. The pressure was moments from tearing the sector apart. Syria froze, terror locking her in place, but Carter shouted her name, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. She felt her feet move before her mind caught up, racing alongside them as they dragged the last survivors out just before the bulkhead collapsed, sealing the chamber forever. They stumbled into the safe corridor, gasping for air as emergency doors slammed shut behind them. The rescued crew lay scattered, coughing but alive, while Carter and Alvarez leaned against the wall, drenched in sweat but still upright. Syria collapsed to her knees, her body shaking uncontrollably, yet her eyes remained fixed on the two humans. This had not been a drill, not a controlled test, this was reality, brutal and merciless. And yet the humans had endured, not only surviving themselves but carrying others to safety as well. They had reached the breaking point, the moment when most beings would surrender, and instead of shattering, they had grown stronger. Siraya realized with a chill that this was what made humans different. It was not just resilience but transformation under pressure. Where others broke, humans adapted. Where others fled, humans fought forward. Where others saw doom, humans clawed out hope. Later, in the infirmary, as medics tended to the wounded, Siraya sat quietly beside Carter. His arm was bandaged, his skin blistered from heat, yet he smiled faintly, as though none of it mattered. "We didn't leave anyone behind," he said softly, almost to himself. Siraya could not find words. Her people would have considered such a mission reckless, even foolish. Risking so much for so few would be seen as unnecessary. But the humans thought differently. To them, saving even one life was worth the price. That was the true meaning of their strength. Not muscle, not toughness, but the refusal to abandon. It was a strength born not from perfection but from imperfection, from a history of surviving against odds that should have ended them long ago. As she watched Carter drift into exhausted sleep, Siraya realized her research had reached a turning point. She was no longer an observer cataloging strange habits. She was a witness to something elemental, something that could not be captured in sterile words. Humans were not just resilient, they were unbreakable in spirit. And now that she had seen it with her own eyes, she knew the galaxy's whispers had been right. They were dangerous, not because they sought to dominate, but because they could endure what others could not. Siraya felt both awe and unease. If humanity's breaking point only made them stronger, then what would happen if the galaxy ever pushed them too far? That question lingered in her mind, heavy and unsettling, as the station slowly returned to order around her. The station had returned to its usual rhythm after the near disaster, but for Siraya, nothing felt the same. Every corridor she walked through, every face she passed, seemed somehow changed in her eyes. Before, she had seen humans as curious, adaptive creatures whose resilience was impressive but distant, something she could study with the cool detachment of a researcher. Now, after standing beside them when the station nearly tore itself apart, she carried a memory that refused to fade, the memory of strength shown not in calm laboratories or quiet observations but in the crucible of survival itself. That experience weighed on her as whispers began spreading among the station's crew. Rumors hinted that the incident had not been an accident, that sabotage might have been the cause. Fingers pointed in many directions, but some voices, sharp with suspicion, began to question Siraya's presence. After all, she was not human, she was new, and her people had a reputation for caution rather than courage. She overheard words like spy, outsider, liability. They cut deeper than she expected, and for the first time she felt the thin line between being tolerated and being trusted. Yet when Carter and Alvarez heard the whispers, they dismissed them instantly. "She saved lives in that fire," Alvarez said firmly. "She was there with us." Carter only nodded, his silence carrying more weight than words. Their defense should have eased her heart, but instead it made her feel the burden of choice pressing harder. It was then that the station commander, a stern woman named Reeves, summoned Siraya privately. Reeves wasted no time with pleasantries. She laid a series of reports across the desk, each filled with technical data pointing to deliberate interference with the station's systems. "We have evidence that this was no accident," Reeves said. "And we believe the saboteur is still here." Her sharp eyes fixed on Siraya. "I need to know where your loyalties lie." The words struck like a blow. Siraya had never been asked such a question before. Among her people, loyalty was assumed, shaped by tradition and unchallenged hierarchy. Here, though, she was being told she had to choose, not only who she would stand with but what that choice would mean for her future. Reeves did not accuse her directly, but the message was clear: prove your trust or remain an outsider. Alone in her quarters later that night, Siraya turned the matter over in her mind endlessly. If she sided with her own people's distant embassy, she could protect her reputation but would lose the fragile bond she had begun to build with humans. If she stood with the humans, she would have to step fully into their world, risking the judgment of her kind. Neither path was simple. Yet when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Carter's hand reaching back into the smoke-filled hall, pulling others forward even when his body was failing. She remembered Alvarez's voice shouting against the roar of fire, urging everyone to keep moving. They had chosen without hesitation, and their choice had been to save lives, not themselves. That clarity haunted her. The following day, a second incident shook the station, though less catastrophic than the first. A power grid in the lower sectors failed, plunging half the station into darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly, and technicians scrambled to stabilize the reactors. This time Syria did not hesitate. She went with Carter and Alvarez into the heart of the problem, where the energy conduits snaked like glowing veins through the station's core. The heat was overwhelming, and stray arcs of power crackled dangerously close as they worked. When a critical relay refused to respond, the crew looked around nervously, no one willing to step into the narrow chamber filled with unstable energy. Syria surprised them all by moving forward. She had studied the schematics, she knew the risk, and she understood that waiting would mean complete collapse of the grid. Carter reached to stop her, but she shook her head firmly. "You risked everything for others," she said quietly. "Now let me do the same." She slipped into the chamber, her slim hands working quickly over the sparking relay, her mind calm despite the sparks that burned at her skin. For a moment it seemed the system would overload, but then her adjustments clicked into place. The hum of the reactors steadied, the lights flared back to life, and the crew outside erupted in relieved shouts. Syria emerged shaking and scorched, but alive, and for the first time the suspicious eyes that had followed her seemed to soften. Reeves confronted her later, not with accusations this time but with something closer to respect. "You didn't have to do that," the commander said. "You're not even under my command." Syria looked at her steadily. "I had to make a choice," she replied, "and I chose to stand with those who would never abandon me." Reeves said nothing more, but the faint nod she gave carried a weight Syria would not forget. That night, as she sat quietly in the observation deck, staring at the endless sea of stars, Carter joined her. He did not speak for a long while, simply sitting beside her in silence, as though he understood that words were unnecessary. Finally, he said, "It's not easy, making that kind of choice. But once you do, you don't look back." Syria nodded, her gaze fixed on the constellations stretching across the void. She felt the truth of his words deep within her. She had stepped beyond observation, beyond neutrality, and into something larger. She had chosen not because she had to, but because she believed. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she felt the faint stirring of strength in her own spirit, a strength she had only ever seen in humans before. Yet beneath that calm moment lingered a shadow of unease. The saboteur was still at large, and if the first attack had failed, then surely another would come. The choice she had made was only the beginning. What lay ahead would test not just her resolve but her very place among both her people and the humans. And as she watched the faint reflection of her own face in the glass, framed by the vastness of space, she wondered quietly to herself, would her choice be enough when the true test arrived? The days following the second incident on the station moved with an uneasy rhythm, as though every shadow carried a secret and every silence hid a threat, yet Syria found herself walking with a steadier heart, no longer drifting on the edge of belonging but tied by her choice to the humans she once only studied, though beneath this fragile sense of connection the tension across the station grew heavier, for everyone knew the saboteur was not gone and might strike again, and it was in this atmosphere that Reeves called a meeting of the senior crew, Carter, Alvarez, and Syria among them, a meeting that would unravel a truth more dangerous than any of them had guessed, because Reeves revealed evidence from the station's encrypted logs that pointed to transmissions leaving their system during both crises, coded in a language no human recognized but that Syria did, for it was from her own people, and the realization struck her with both shame and clarity, that the sabotage was not random at all but the work of someone who shared her heritage, perhaps even someone sent to test her loyalty, and as the crew turned their eyes toward her the weight of silence pressed so hard she could barely breathe, yet instead of shrinking back she raised her voice with steady resolve and explained the code, how it was used by factions within her species that rejected cooperation with humans, factions that feared humanity's resilience and adaptability because they saw it as a rising power that could threaten their long-standing ways, and though speaking those words felt like cutting away a piece of herself, she knew it was necessary, for withholding the truth now would only deepen suspicion and divide them further. Reeves listened intently, then gave Syria a direct order, not out of distrust but because she was the only one who could track the signal, and so for the first time Syria was given true responsibility beyond observation, placed in command of a task that could either save the station or expose her as complicit if she failed, and as she worked in the dim glow of the data center, Carter and Alvarez by her side, she felt the strange mix of fear and determination that humans seemed to carry so naturally, realizing that her path forward was no longer about watching and learning but about acting, shaping outcomes with her own hands. Hours of tense searching brought them to an unlikely suspect, a quiet maintenance worker who had blended so well into the background that none had thought to question him, but Syria recognized the faint traces of her people's dialect in his private notes, and when they confronted him deep in the mechanical bays he dropped the mask of obedience and spoke with a bitterness that echoed across the chamber, accusing humanity of spreading like fire, of changing the balance of power, of drawing her kind into dangerous alliances that would erode their traditions, and for a moment Syria wavered, because his words carried the echo of voices she had grown up hearing, voices that preached caution and warned against change, but then she looked at Carter standing firm despite the bruises of past battles, Alvarez watching with sharp unflinching eyes, and she remembered the moment she chose to step into the reactor chamber, remembered the way trust had been given to her not out of obligation but out of belief, and she realized the saboteurs' arguments were only fear clothed in pride, fear of what could be lost rather than hope for what could be built. With calm defiance she stepped forward and answered him, not in human speech but in her own tongue, telling him that strength was not preserved by hiding from others but by standing beside them, that resilience was not weakness but proof that survival could be shared, and though her words did not sway him, they startled him long enough for Reeves's security team to disarm and capture him, ending the threat before he could detonate the charges he had hidden in the bay. The danger was over, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered, and as the saboteur was taken away Reeves turned to Syria with an expression that held no suspicion now, only a hard-earned respect, and said quietly, "You made your choice clear tonight." Those words rang louder than applause could have, and though Syria said nothing in reply, inside her heart she felt a weight lift, replaced by something solid and unshakable, the knowledge that she was no longer merely an outsider given a place by courtesy but someone who had claimed her own place through action and loyalty. In the days that followed, the repairs continued, the lights of the station shining brighter with every passing hour, and Syria moved among the humans with a new ease, her steps lighter even as her thoughts grew deeper, because she understood that what had happened was more than survival, it was the shaping of trust between species that once only regarded each other with distance, and though whispers would still exist in the galaxy, whispers of caution, doubt, and fear, she had seen enough to know that partnership was not a dream but a reality being forged in small acts of courage every day. On the final evening before her official report was to be sent back to her own people, Syria stood once again in the observation deck, the stars stretching endless before her, and Carter joined her as he often did, silent at first, then finally asking, "So what will you tell them?" She did not answer right away, for her mind drifted to the many paths she could take. She could write a safe report filled with neutral observations, she could conceal the sabotage and spare her people the shame, she could even distance herself to remain untouched, but then she thought of the station's fire, of the reactor's sparks, of the saboteur's bitter face, and most of all of the unspoken bond that had grown between her and those who had trusted her when they had no reason to, and with that, she knew her answer. I will tell them the truth, she said simply, and if they fear it, then let them fear. But I will not. Carter nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips, and together they watched the stars, silent companions bound by the choices they had made. And though Syria knew her journey was far from over, she also knew that she had crossed a line that could never be undone. She was no longer just an observer of humanity, she was part of their story, and they were part of hers, and that revelation, simple yet profound, would guide her into whatever awaited in the vast, uncertain future.